Okay, hello. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Kathryn Brunet, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my experiences teaching paleography workshops online to increase the accessibility of paleography skills with digital tools. I'll be offering ideas on how library workers can introduce paleography to students, the public, and those who are limited by financial or geographical barriers. Special collections and research libraries are in a unique position. They have access to many demographics who use the collections: university students, academics, and the public. Libraries also have access to materials for teaching, and trained librarians know the collections and have expertise in their institution's specialized collecting strengths. With this presentation, I want to encourage librarians who are interested in teaching paleography as a form of outreach workshops and show them how I've been practicing this form of pedagogy for the past 3 years. Oh, and this is my overview, which I just said. I graduated from my master's program in Library and Information Science at the University of California, Los Angeles in 2020, in June. And because of COVID and the university courses being online, I saw an opportunity for online paleography engagement with undergraduates as a supplement to their regular coursework. I connected with professors in the Southern California region and designed online single-session paleography workshops, first for undergraduate students as a guest lecturer for their online classes, and then eventually branching out to other universities and public organizations across the United States, aiming to reach a wider audience and provide more access to this beginner training. Thus far, I've taught undergraduate university students, postgraduate students, community groups like book clubs and arts collectives, university organizations like print art groups, and even one huge public online event covering 3 one-hour-long sessions with participants from all ages, including kids. The goal of my workshops is to introduce paleography as a practice to inspire curiosity in students who haven't thought to work directly with primary sources, and help all of my participants, student or otherwise, to build confidence when working with historical documents. In my own experience working with primary sources, which I started when I began the second career in librarianship in 2018, I noticed there were few opportunities for me to get hands-on experience reading historical materials with the guidance of a professor or a librarian. Furthermore, I noticed that classes that I did take to gain this training and knowledge were very expensive, mostly out of reach or completely unknown to my fellow students and early career librarians. Programs like the Rare Book Schools are a fantastic way to train beginners, and I have benefited myself greatly from these programs, but they are often financially out of reach or geographically impossible for many interested researchers and students curious about studying historical documents. My workshops act as a sort of librarian companion to the extensive curricula of Rare Book School programs or full-length university modules on paleography, which of course I still highly recommend for advanced researchers and postgraduate students of literature and history. So in my online workshops, I have always used Zoom, which makes screen sharing easy, as we are doing right now. Using a Canva slide deck, which I'm also doing right now, the same format. The first part of my workshop is a 20-minute lecture of basics when approaching Western paleography, particularly Latin-based historical handwriting. I introduce definitions of key terms, guidance when learning a new alphabet, and important common features like the long S, abbreviations, minims, and the advice to make an alphabet for reference as I transcribe. And you can see 2 examples from the slide deck that I use in my lectures. On the left is some examples of common abbreviations in Latin and English. And on the right, these are photos of my actual alphabets that I have created while doing my own paleography transcription to show the students what that could look like with various forms of certain letters. After the lecture portion, which I stress is open for discussion and free for questions at any time, we moved into transcription practice. I use a combination of scanned examples from paleography books that I own, in addition to some publicly digitized manuscripts, such as this example here, the Anglicana script from the Ellesmere Chaucer, available on the Huntington Library's website. It allows me to magnify to an extreme to point out minute details of the scribe's pen strokes and unique attributes of these letter forms. Using a digital facsimile also allows for students to all see this document at the same time, close up and in color, in high definition quality, instead of craning their necks over one book or struggling with photocopies that might be grainy or digitally degraded. And this is, this example on the screen here is an example of what I use, and my cursor here, I will follow along with this first line. I'll help transcribe and visually go across the letters with my cursor so they can sort of see how the pen strokes would have been created. If it's for a university course, I tailor the manuscripts that I use as examples to the syllabus readings, using online facsimiles with this high resolution scan, as we see here, color scans from paleography reference books, which I mentioned, and documents from online paleography resources like the fantastic ones at the National Archives UK. Each workshop that I give is slightly different depending on the difficulty of scripts that I think that the audience can handle and wants to learn, the length that we've agreed on of the workshop, and what I think the audience would be interested in seeing. If it's for a public or community workshop, I select a variety of scripts to expose students to different time periods and letter forms, as well as demonstrate the evolution of scripts over time, usually starting with Caroline minuscule and usually ending around an early modern hand like Elizabethan secretary. But I'm not too mean. Sometimes I'll throw in an easy example of italic just to boost their confidence towards the end, because I know secretary can be very difficult. In the transcription of the workshop, I discuss the style of the script first, and then the overall look of the page, and most importantly, the context of the document, such as a charter or a book of hours, and what that means, why it's formatted in this way. Then I zoom in the viewer close, as I just described, and I transcribe the first line, tracing the letters as I go, talking about the features of the letters and how to compare them to other letters on the page, etc. And then I give the students 3 minutes to transcribe on their own. I keep the audio open for questions during this time, just in case they have things come up that they're struggling with during their 3 minutes. After their 3 minutes, we go over their work together, and I ask for volunteers. Usually a few brave people will share their transcriptions with me, and we discuss any mistakes, uncommon letter forms that they are unsure about, and any other questions about the script, the decoration, or the format or history of the document we're looking at. I usually do about 3 or 4 of these exercises before we wrap up our workshop with a Q&A. The specifics of the workshop vary depending on the focus of the audience. And for example, I've taught workshops tailored to medieval scripts, early modern scripts, English-focused, Irish-focused, and more general Western manuscripts, Italian, Spanish, mostly Western European, which is my specialty, but all over. My undergrad workshops have had up to 76 students participating, which is another challenge because students are far less likely to answer questions or volunteer their answers in large groups. So this is something that I have worked with the professor and on my own to handle those really large lecture hall sort of groups. My postgraduate workshops are smaller and usually foster more detailed questions. Sometimes the group is as small as 6 or 8 people, and then we get lots of very thoughtful observations and have a discussion as we go. And I usually limit my public workshops to 15 to 20 people, so they have a more personal experience and are comfortable answering questions throughout the lecture and transcription. If the workshop is a series, the second session is devoted to more specific definitions, such as majuscule, minuscule, cursiva, formata, textura, etc., like that. And then we do usually 4 more transcriptions in the second session. I always send a follow-up email with all the materials, transcriptions, and translations, and recommended resources for further paleography skills, and encourage any further questions they may have. I always stress that the students in my workshops that these skills can be applied to any time period. and any handwriting that they're studying. And that medieval handwriting is just my expertise, so that's why I use these examples, but they can put it to any sort of project they have. And I have received very positive results from my workshops. I commonly send out a Google form to get feedback, and here are some of the important points that I have gathered. There is a wide audience interested in paleography training. Participants have been master's students studying library science, undergrad students studying English literature, history, and art history. I've had students studying historical fencing manuals, an art historian studying 15th and 16th century German texts, a postgraduate student interning at an archive and reading a Victorian diary in German and English, and another participant who researches 19th and 20th century English, Italian, and Latin American texts. Others have just been part of the general public interested in calligraphy and art, and others who just enjoy engaging with medieval materials. Their reasons for taking my workshops are quite varied. Some take it to help with reading research documents that they're already planning on using, and others want to build confidence with primary sources from an art history perspective. Some participants wanted to be more prepared when helping students and researchers in their work in archives and special collections, and others are looking to develop outreach and engagement programs of their own and thought this would be a great way for them to prepare for those things. And some people just took it for fun and had a good time. Most had little or no training with reading historical scripts before, and some were familiar with calligraphy or the word paleography, but hadn't studied it. They hadn't been aware of how challenging it might be and appreciated the variety of scripts we transcribe, giving them sort of a survey of the field. Feedback has confirmed for me that transcribing and exploring a document in a virtual environment has its benefits. As I mentioned, it allows for an entire group to look at the same image and magnify the text much more closely. Most people felt that the skills they learned they could apply elsewhere in the future and were interested in taking more workshops to develop these skills further. The only common complaint was that they wanted more examples of different scripts and they wanted the workshop to last longer. There were some other suggestions, such as integrating in more student participation, sending materials before the workshop so they could get familiar, and assigning some at-home transcription between sessions or after the sessions were over to keep working on certain things. Feedback from the professors whose classes I guest lectured at has been very positive, and I returned to multiple classes with similar workshops and the same tutors. Over the past 3 years, I have now had over 240 learners of paleography in my workshops. What I have concluded from doing these workshops, along with many other workshops on medieval manuscript production and early modern book history, is that students and others want access to these skills and just need a little encouragement to get them. Speaking with some UK paleography instructors, I've learned that paleography is often not part of university library programming and left up to formal paleography classes for the select few advanced students who have achieved this level of education. So my question is this: why not introduce reading primary sources earlier? Of course, there is an obvious language barrier for many texts, but for an introduction to reading scripts, this language issue has not been a problem for me when teaching workshops, and it's just as effective to spark interest in primary source engagement without being able to read that specific language. I'm here to offer my example of workshops as a model for potential library programming, something that could be offered for undergraduates visiting special collections, postgraduate students without access to paleography training, and public programming to help other librarians, archivists, and researchers at the beginning level access point. These workshops could be used in a way to introduce students to primary source research, which can be very intimidating and unfamiliar to students, particularly at an undergraduate level. Public researchers can also feel lost and overwhelmed with approaching historical texts, and these workshops can be customized to focus on this demographic. These workshops I teach are entirely online, but the structure could be useful in a hybrid format if the instructor has access to rare materials. The important thing I have learned is that the interest is there. Registration for my workshops is always full and sometimes waitlisted. And this isn't because they know who I am or familiar with my workshops. They see the title and description of the event, and they are interested in using primary sources, but need help approaching them. With these workshops, I have helped students and the public discover something they have never really thought about before, which is how I came to paleography, not knowing what I didn't know. I believe that libraries could use this simple workshop model to encourage more interaction with special collections materials at their institutions, and even produce community programming using these same materials. I wanted to share my experience of observing a need in a community and successfully filling that need with my workshops. There is a follow-up to this model, the need for paleography instruction for non-Latin scripts. Speaking with UK paleography tutors that I have taken classes with, they were unfamiliar with many resources for students to access if they want to learn to read manuscripts written in languages from around the world. So many UK libraries have fantastic collections with librarians who are experts on these manuscripts. And I thought that perhaps me sharing my experience today, teaching my workshops, that could encourage these librarians and archivists who have these language skills and access to manuscripts outside the Latin world to think about offering paleography workshops for those types of collections in libraries. Paleography skills in all languages can be even more useful now that we have AI programs like Transcribus, which open up the possibilities of entire manuscripts being transcribed and available using a fraction of the time it would take to transcribe manually. And I was very happy yesterday to see that in Mia's presentation, many people were putting in the chat that they had used Transcribus. So this presentation is all very open for discussion. I'm interested in hearing other people's experiences in this type of programming, and if they think workshops like mine could be useful in their libraries for students and other researchers. These are simple and straightforward teaching methods. They have proven very successful for me and could be easily added and adapted to existing library programming, and offering a way for librarians to teach paleography on a smaller scale to reach an interested wider audience. And I forgot to mention that these are some of the feedback comments that I have received talking about someone. The first one is talking about historically and artistically, they had never really looked at the writing, and they were an art history major, and they're appreciative of this writing now as its own field and not just the decoration. And others, the second one is someone who works in archives and special collections and wants to be more prepared to help students and researchers. And the bottom two are how the workshop is organized and how it is effective to do this short lecture in the beginning and then move on to the transcription. So yes, that is my presentation. Thank you so much. And I hope to answer some of your questions.
Hi, thanks so much, Kathryn. That was absolutely great. I am just waiting for some questions to come in, but while I wait for that, I'm going to use chair's privilege and ask a couple of mine.
Yeah, go.
Do you think you could reflect a bit about your experience of working with different kinds of groups and whether they approach paleography in any kind of different ways? Has it been some kind of taken to it more naturally than others?
Yeah, I think that this is not going to come as a surprise, but postgraduate students are more focused and more eager to learn because they have research projects in mind, and they know what they want to study, and they know it's really important to be able to read their primary source materials. I think undergraduates are kind of 50-50. Some of them are just taking the class because they were interested, and I'm a guest lecturer, so they're just participating. And then others sort of get sucked in. They're like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. And the transcription almost feels like a game when you do it. You're like, oh, can I get this to work out? Does this make sense? And I think at that level, the undergraduate level, that they enjoy it. But they are, I have a lot of great feedback, but I don't have a lot of examples of them raising hands and speaking during the presentation. I think they are more hesitant to speak up. But usually there's 3 or 4 undergrads who will carry the rest of the group in the workshop. they'll be excited about the transcription and want to speak up about it. But yeah, I understand in front of your peers, especially in the video format, it is scary to speak up and ask questions and read your transcription out loud if it's wrong. I try to make sure the stakes are very low and that they know they can always struggle through it, and we'll talk about why it is this one way and it looks like another, because there's a lot of, I plant a lot of things to trip them up to see, oh, if you compare these S's, like this isn't really an S or this isn't really an A, and that kind of thing, to make it as much of a learning process as possible. But yeah, the public workshops, I get probably the most enthusiasm because they have found this workshop on their own. They have, in some cases, paid a small fee for it, and they are really excited to be there. And those are the ones I usually do more than one session for. And every time in the second session, they're like, make more sessions. They're really excited. They like the format of me making these a little more approachable, because I know we all have the internet and we could all find documents to transcribe, but me sort of packaging these in, this is an introductory level version that you can practice with me together, that makes it feel much more attainable, I think. And the public workshops are particularly fun because people get really excited when they get things right.
Yeah, I can well imagine that. We have a few questions coming through now. So the first one is, do you have to be able to read Latin?
No, you don't have to be able to read Latin. And thank goodness, because I am an intermediate level Latin learner. So I did teach these before I even knew any Latin at all. And it can be a problem, but what I did before I started taking Latin is, well, one, I only did a couple Latin texts. I didn't do all Latin texts, and I don't usually do all Latin because most of my participants aren't proficient in Latin. So it's very frustrating to not understand those abbreviations and not know why the endings are a certain way. So I don't try to drown them in too much medieval Latin, but you don't need to know Latin to do this, because you have the power of the instructor, which means you have the transcription. You can either do the transcription yourself beforehand, or you can find an official transcription with the materials you're already using. For example, the Canterbury Tales is in English, of course, but Middle English. That has been printed so many times. I have a very strong transcription of it. I know exactly what it's supposed to say. And what you do is you find Latin texts that you know are correct in this transcription you have. And in the beginning, I used Ray Clemens's book on medieval manuscripts, and he has a lot of great examples and transcriptions in them. And the abbreviations are expanded, and you can feel very confident about guiding your students through it just by having those, having all of that prepared beforehand. And yeah, what I also started doing, I hadn't initially and realized very quickly, having the translation is also really helpful. That way your students know what they're looking at and can find it elsewhere. And it's just the extra piece of the puzzle that in the beginning I hadn't thought about what the words really meant. And now that I can read more Latin, that's also very helpful for me to know those translations are part of it. But yeah, no Latin required. It becomes more helpful as you go, but most of the students in the undergrad have no Latin at all. And I always start with the oldest Latin scripts for at least 2 transcriptions.
Great. We have a question about whether you've ever conducted workshops on 20th century paleography for students who are not familiar with cursive, or has that never been a problem for the students that sign up?
I haven't taught it, but I absolutely think you could. There's lots of great transcription projects online. I think, is it Florence Nightingale has a huge project of transcribing all of her letters, and I think it could be very relevant. I didn't work with any professors who taught more modern topics, but I think if the syllabus is there and you reach out to the professor, I think if you have good examples, you could very easily teach more modern cursive, because I think that may also be needed for this generation of students who are not using handwritten materials almost at all anymore.
Yeah.
we're typing everything. We don't really write at all. So they aren't seeing it. So it's not really just, do they learn cursive, but can they transcribe any kind of handwriting? So yeah, I think it could be applied. I've used it on some German cursive from my genealogy records, some birth certificates and things in the 19th century. When I say it can be applied everywhere, I really mean it. I've used it in a bunch of different ways, and I encourage my students to do the same.
Yeah, I can see that this could be a growing need as time goes
I think
on,
it's only going to
definitely.
be more important to be able
Yeah.
to approach materials like this.
We now have loads of questions, but I know
Great.
that we're kind of running out of time, so I'm just going to ask a couple more. So maybe I'll just do them together, and then you can answer together. So have your public workshops generally been standalone events, or have they been part of wider programming for a library or archive? And then the second one, kind of related, do you have any videos that we can direct people to, or is it based to wait for one of your public workshops if people wanted to do one?
I have a little bit of everything for that. I've done them when I first started, I just cold emailed professors. I looked at the classes listed online or the courses listed online. I saw who was teaching it and what the title of the course was, and I just emailed them and asked, I have this workshop. I think it would be really helpful as a guest lecture for your semester-long class, and almost everyone was very positive about it. They were really welcome. They really welcomed it, because oftentimes the professors don't have time to teach this kind of thing, but know the value of it, and to sort of package it in a 1 hour, 1.5 hour session. They were really grateful to have that. So a lot of them were sort of a guest lecture, one session. Oh, somebody found my website, put it in the chat. Yes, my website has the thing I was going to mention, which is the video. I want everyone to be very kind to me. The video is from my first ever paleography workshop. It is 3 hours long, and it is a totally public workshop. I shared it online, and it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I do still use some of those materials now. It's a lot tighter and a lot more professional now than it was then. But if you're willing to watch that video on my website, that gives you essentially the structure that I use now and how I teach it. It's exactly the same sort of thing. But yeah, I have taught some series through community organizations. So the San Francisco Center for the Book is one of many different community organizations that has a lot of online workshops and lectures, and I reached out to many of those types of organizations, and they have asked me back again and again, because the people who are interested in book arts and printing really think this is an interesting way to add to their skills and just their curiosity. So yeah, they're often one-offs in terms of how far we get, but a few of them have been second sessions, and I'm toying with the idea of third sessions as well. But there is a point where you need to just go off and do this for yourself in your own research. Like, it's very fun to keep doing it. I agree, I love doing paleography transcriptions, but there's a point where if you have all these tools, now you can go off and transcribe whatever you want to look at.
Great. Thanks so much, Kathryn. I'm sorry to those whose questions we didn't get to, but we need to keep a tight ship today.
I'm happy for anyone to email me. My website has my contact. If anybody wants to talk to me about this, I'm happy to share any materials that I use. Like I said, this is an open conversation. I'm always trying to improve how I do things, and I really love doing it, and I want more people to have access to these types of skills. But yeah, I'm happy to share anything further. If somebody wants to shoot me an email and ask me anything else, go ahead. That would be great.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So we're now going to just have a tiny bit of Zoom admin while I introduce Joseph Hone. So just hang on 1 second. Escape room. So I'd like to introduce Charlotte Berry and Tessa Spencer. So Charlotte Berry is a qualified archivist and has worked at a wide range of repositories across England, Wales and Scotland. She's currently at the National Records of Scotland, and and there she has taught paleography for Workers' Educational Association and the University of Oxford and the University of Dundee. Tessa Spencer is a history graduate from the Universities of St Andrews and Glasgow and a professional archivist, and she's head of outreach and learning at National Records of Scotland, where she's worked for over 20 years in various roles, and she has also taught paleography evening classes at the University of Edinburgh for several years. So looking forward to this very much. I'll pass over to you, Tessa and Charlotte.
Thank you very much. And we'll just share our screen and just say that I'm Charlotte and this is Tessa, in case you're wondering which is which. Right, can everybody see that now? Because we can't see you now. Okay, let me just get started.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for inviting us to speak at this conference. We're delighted to take part and talk paleography, which is one of our favourite things. We've both taught paleography in the past, and we're keen that this skill remains current, relevant and popular within our profession. This paper will address how National Records of Scotland, NRS, and its predecessor institutions have supported its staff and stakeholders in developing and maintaining paleography and archival literacy skills. But before we begin, we'll provide a brief introduction to NRS, who we are, where we are, and what we do and hold.
So, as you've explained, Tessa's head of outreach and learning here, and I'm now head of records and archives engagement in the National Records of Scotland. So for what we actually do, NRS is a non-ministerial department of Scottish Government, and it was established on the 1st of April 2011 following the merger of the National Archives of Scotland and the General Register Office of Scotland. And our purpose is to collect, preserve and produce information about Scotland's people and history, and to make it available to inform current and future generations. NRS performs the registration and statistical functions of the Registrar General for Scotland and the archival functions of the Keeper of the Records of Scotland, including maintaining the archives as one of Scotland's 5 national collections.
NRS holds around 80 kilometres, 49.7 miles of records, which are stored in secure and temperature-controlled rooms. The records span from the 12th to the 21st centuries, touching on virtually every aspect of Scottish life. We are responsible for the public and legal records of Scotland, but we also have many local and private archives. They relate to a variety of subjects, including the church, law, government, and everyday life. We hold and make available one of the most varied archive collections of records in Britain. NRS's collections are housed across 4 buildings in Edinburgh, 3 of which are in the New Town: General Register House, New Register House and West Register House, which are within a 15-minute walk of each other. The 4th, Thomas Thompson House, a modern purpose-built repository, can be found to the west of the city, 30 minutes away on the tram.
So in former years, it was typical for new junior curatorial staff to come in through an academic route in history and to be trained up on the job through intensive document, Latin and paleography training delivered in pairs by an experienced member of staff. NRS specialists also taught on the annual Scottish Archive Training School run by Glasgow University, which our staff could attend when they arrived in post. This finished in around 2000 and it focused on Scottish sources and skills. And the Old Society of Archivists Self-Study Diploma is also a possible route of qualification. And today we expect most entrants to have a postgrad qualification, although we're starting to look at new ways that colleagues can join us. Archivists typically either complete full-time training at archive school or one of the distance learning alternatives, and the Glasgow and Dundee courses are understandably popular. Curatorial staff used to switch roles on a regular basis, getting a wide range of experience across our archival functions and collections. But today we move role less, meaning that we become experts in perhaps a narrower context with fewer opportunities to keep our skills fresh or to learn new ones. And we're now beginning to feel the impact of the UK archive courses changing some of their teaching emphasis from historical to digital skills and literacy, And this is impacting on the assumptions that line managers can make about the available competencies within their teams and branches. And we're starting to find some gaps in knowledge compared with what knowledge we could take for granted 20 years ago. We'll look at this in a little more detail before exploring what opportunities we can currently offer for professional development and what we're planning for the future. So the archival landscape has changed massively during the careers of current NRS staff, and it's continuing to change as we transition from paper to born digital record creation and keeping. The pandemic has helped to speed up the process towards a digital working environment for us all, and this poses huge challenges for training and development as we work towards ingesting and accessing born digital archives. Inevitably, more attention is now being given within the formal archive courses to cover these digital issues, and information governance and records management are also becoming more prominent. It's an era of huge change and an exciting one, but there's no contesting the fact that this is taking away opportunities to consolidate and develop and refresh our historical skills. At one time, most of our colleagues could read the secretary hand quite well, and we're not sure now that we can take that for granted. So what has led us up to this point? So inevitably, many new archivists at NRS will choose to do the full-time course in information management and preservation at Glasgow, which focuses on digital areas, and it offers only a 5-week, 10-hour optional module on early modern palaeography. Although there's also the distance learning course in archives and records management at Dundee, which offers optional modules on Latin and Scottish palaeography, family and local history. Most UK archive courses require a choice between optional modules in digital and historical skills. And this is a difficult choice, and we're finding right now that we can't assume the basic level of palaeography for our junior archivists. So we're actively looking at other options for skilling up our staff and covering as many bases as possible in-house. Medieval palaeography and diplomatic are particularly problematic skills for us, as only Aberystwyth and Liverpool appear to offer training in these areas. But luckily, we have a really solid track record in NRS in recent years in palaeography resources, and we'll be putting those to good use. We'll look at these now before finally considering next steps to ensure that our staff are sufficiently trained and skilled in archival literacy.
Each year, NRS runs evening classes in palaeography in partnership with the University of Edinburgh's Centre for Open Learning. This practical course in Scottish handwriting covers the period 1500 to 1700 using facsimiles of documents held by NRS, and is taught by 2 NRS archivists at General Register House in Edinburgh. The course runs for 10 weeks on Tuesday evenings from September, with the second 10-week term starting in the following January. We think the course has been running for about 50 years now, so it's proved a really useful way of staff maintaining their palaeography skills, as there is no way of hiding in a teaching space. The course aims to enhance research skills by introducing students to transcriptions of documents from the 16th to 18th centuries. It focuses on how to read old handwriting of the period and develop archival research methods. It introduces familiar letter forms, explaining secretary hand and its alphabet, covers abbreviations, dates, numerals, time, measurements and money, as well as conventions for transcription. There is even practical handwriting exercise using feathers, quills and ink. More information can be found on the University of Edinburgh's short courses pages, where you can also enrol onto the course if you live in the Edinburgh area. We are currently discussing options for future delivery with the university. The Scottish Handwriting Kit is a self-help pack and step-by-step guide to reading the handwriting of Scottish documents originating between the 16th and 18th centuries using facsimiles, mainly from the NRS archives, to aid transcription. Those of you already familiar with Scottish family history and Scotland's people may recognise some of the record types included, such as wills, a testament and inventory, and Kirk session minutes. Scotland's People is the official Scottish Government resource where you can access digital images of statutory registers of births, deaths, marriages, all parish registers and more. It is used by hundreds of thousands of people each year who benefit from practical online guidance in palaeography to help them research family history biography, and local and social history. The kit on display here is an updated version of the original 1994 kit published by Dr. Alison Rosie, a colleague of ours, which is created in partnership with the Scottish Records Association. The original contents have been refreshed by NRS staff with gorgeous high-resolution images, updated instructions and bibliography, and the inclusion of web sources for further practice and reading. For the first time, a free digital downloadable version is also available. The pack is divided into two parts. The first contains an introduction, chapters on secretary hand characteristics, contemporary alphabets, and an updated bibliography. The second part comprises transcriptions of 12 original documents with historical context, and a high-quality reproduction of each document is also provided. Hard copies of the kit can be purchased from the Scotland's People online store, or you can download a free digital version in PDF format from the publications page on the NRS website. It's an excellent resource for self-study, and it does very usefully fill a gap in available textbooks and resources, specifically on Scottish palaeography and diplomatic, as we will see later. The Scottish Handwriting website was created by NRS colleagues originally as a few additional pages to support the SCAN project, the Scottish Archives Network, to help those using Scottish archives, especially wills and testaments, which were being digitised as part of that project for the website Scottish Documents, and are now made available on Scotland's People. When SCAN merged into NRS in 2003, it became a bigger priority for NRS online resources staff, who dedicated significant time and energy to set it up on a larger scale, providing practical tuition in palaeography for historians, genealogists, and other researchers who have difficulty reading manuscript historical records written in Scotland in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries in order to help them improve their skills. The website has proved hugely popular over the years and had considerable staff time dedicated to it when it was first being developed and launched. It includes a popular palaeography problem solver and a range of tutorials on Scottish sources, including an introductory one for complete beginners. There is also a coaching manual which contains helpful reference pages on numbers, letters, and other resources. It has become largely dormant over recent years following the creation of NRS in 2013, although it is still a very well used online. NRS is now looking to rationalise its websites, and there are long-term plans to move some of the content from this site onto the Scotland's People website, which is also managed by NRS. A range of resources have already been transferred, and more will follow in due course. We hope that much of the invaluable content from Scottish handwriting will become more heavily used as it becomes accessed through a new route online with higher traffic and different audiences.
So the the Scottish Records Association, SRA, was formed in 1977, providing a forum for users, owners, and custodians of records to discuss matters relating to records, their custody, conservation, and research. They publish an annual academic journal, as well as running an annual conference and archive visits. NRS staff have been actively involved with SRA for many years, helping to run events and serving on the committee in various roles. SRA also now run palaeography classes via a small team of tutors, including 2 former NRS staff who set up the Scottish Handwriting website. These classes stem from palaeography poses included in the SRA's own newsletter and from a workshop run on wills and testaments in 2003. These were very popular, so a workshop for beginners was developed, which could be run on request by the SRA tutors. These moved online during the pandemic and are now offered either on-site or online, and we've also developed a follow-up workshop on household and family papers. We'll keep you posted as we're currently firming up new dates, but in the past we've run these sessions at record offices or historic houses, and we're open to requests for future venues or groups who are interested in this option. And I've just joined the SRA team as a tutor, so do get in touch. So next steps. So as you can see, we're fortunate at NRS that we have a wealth of resources on which to draw. We're not starting from scratch here when we're looking at options to develop in-house training in palaeography and record skills and diplomatic. We already have the evening classes, the self-study pack and the website to use with new staff and for those refreshing their skills. There are also relevant standalone modules offered by Dundee and Aberystwyth, but few staff would be able to benefit from these on a regular basis. And compared to English records in palaeography, where there have been several new publications appearing recently, there are relatively few printed sources available specifically for Scotland, which we could then use for professional development. So we need to give some serious thought now as to how we'll implement a training programme in skills across NRS, not just in palaeography and diplomatic, but also in digital skills, information governance and other areas. It's getting increasingly difficult to keep up to date with all the developments across our sector as record keeping morphs in so many different directions. But this is something we're turning our attention towards in coming months and years. So I've recently been gathering in relevant teaching materials from previous in-house training from current and former staff, as shown here in this rather random heap of photocopied documents and teaching notes, which are waiting to be sorted out, refreshed and refocused.
We can see some specific examples of materials shown here, written by extremely knowledgeable former staff who are long gone, such as Donaldson's Sources for Scottish History, Latin words found in Scottish documents, and 2 handouts on Latin from the long extinct Scottish Archive Training School. Current and recently retired colleagues have been very generous in sharing the handouts they use as in-house students, and luckily, as good archivists, they kept them all in case these resources became useful, like right now.
So we have lots of teaching materials that we gathered for palaeography from across NRS, such as shown here for our evening classes, which we regularly refresh and revise. And we have a pool of staff who have run these classes in past years and who have relevant skills and interests, which will prove invaluable now as we plan ahead. We also have an excellent library run by a professional librarian, which contains all the standard relevant texts, including hard to find Society of Archivists training materials like these. And there's good news in that the Archives and Records Association in the UK is apparently considering at the moment whether to refresh and reuse the old diploma manual module notes for wider professional benefit. And that does include a module on Scottish diplomatic. So apart from our own homegrown NRS materials, there are also more and more online resources appearing over time. So we'll be keeping an eye out for those and we'll incorporate these into our teaching where possible. We're also fortunate that we have had digitisation programmes running widely across our collections for many years, and we can digitise documents afresh if needed. Immediate next steps are to carry out a survey to find out what skills existing staff have or might not actively be using at the moment, or new skills which they need to develop. Then we can review which materials we can recycle and what we need to develop afresh, and what sorts of training models will suit current working practices. So how do we create a new programme that will prove engaging and relevant for our staff, but it's not overly onerous to set up and run and refresh? And our curatorial staff are based in 3 buildings, all located at some distance from each other. With the change to hybrid working, we often don't see each other as we once did in the past. Some of our staff work full-time in public-facing roles and they have less availability for real-time classes than others working elsewhere. So there are lots of questions to address here, and as some of our staff with particular historical expertise eventually retire, we are looking at succession planning too. Do we need to replace skills exactly like for like, or are there different models out there which might work? We're considering making use of a knowledge transfer model provided by the National Archives in Kew to start preparing for this period of transition and to ensure that we capture vital information at the right time. We will also look to maximise use of existing networks. As a National Archives, we're well placed within the wider sector to find out what is happening further afield. And as we have seen, SRA has provided an essential mechanism in particular relation to palaeography. We could explore links with ARA Scotland and Central ARA and others to look at palaeography and diplomatic provision across Scotland and the UK. And we also need to keep up with how these skills are taught on the archive courses, as well as exploring new digital methods for knowledge exchange and practice. As those of us who have toiled over months and years to develop and maintain our historical archive skills, we use it or we lose it.
And we've listed for you here all the websites quoted in this talk: the NRS Scottish Handwriting website, the the NRS handwriting evening classes taught in partnership with Edinburgh University, the NRS SRA Scottish Handwriting Pack, and the Scottish Records Association Palaeography classes. Thank you for listening to this paper. We hope you found it interesting, and we're keen to know if any of what we have outlined chimes with you and your workplaces. Can you read the document on the screen, which is an extract from a witchcraft confession in Stirling in 1590? How are you keeping palaeography alive where you work? Or do you feel you don't need to in these digital times? We welcome any questions from you. Alternatively, if you think of a question later on, please get in touch with us at education@nrscotland.gov.uk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to both of you. It was so fascinating to hear about everything that's going on, and you're doing so much work in this area. We have a few minutes for questions. I'm just waiting while hopefully some come in, but I do have a few questions of my own. If we can start with, I want to pick up on what you were saying in relation to some of the things that Kathryn said earlier on this afternoon, which is something about the idea that maybe we should be starting palaeography training much earlier with people, not waiting until after they've done a postgraduate degree, even like starting with undergraduates. I was wondering what you think about that, and it's kind of a related question. Have you kind of considered collaborating with academic institutions, whether it's like history courses or archive and library courses?
So I'll go first with when do you start palaeography? I think you should start it at primary school. I think that would be ideal. I mean, I'm not a history graduate. I didn't even do A-level history, so I've had to start late and catch up. And I think on my archive masters, most people were historians, but they hadn't done palaeography as their undergraduate, which I think is missing a trick. I think some courses do now offer that. And that's really, really beneficial. I think it's a skill that you need to develop over time. It's not something you can develop overnight, as we all know. And if you don't use it, you do get rusty. So yeah. I'm finding that now I'm in a role for the first time that isn't working actively with records. So I'm having to try extra hard to keep seeing documents and keeping up that practice. So it would be great if we could build palaeography in earlier. I mean, I've worked in the university sector, and when we've used primary sources with undergraduates, they've usually been really engaged. They really like seeing the real thing. There's no substitute for that. I think they get increasingly used to working in this digital environment where everything is available. And I think the idea of actually having to work with documents that haven't been transcribed, you're actually possibly one of the first people to look at this document and to transcribe it. That is really exciting. And because they're not using handwriting every day, they are really interested in the materiality. So what's the paper like? What's the ink like? What about stamps and seals and all of these strange rips that you see on bits of paper? And when did envelopes get invented, and when did typewriters come in? So there's all of this bigger picture of materiality, and they really, really engage with that. So I think even if you're not teaching palaeography from an early part of an undergraduate course, you can still talk about sources more. I think was a good thing. But I think to talk about academic collaborations, I think Tessa's better placed because she's been here for longer than me.
I think we run workshops, introductions to the archives, which are quite popular with undergraduate and postgraduate students and their lecturers. And we've gradually introduced actually having archives in the class, as well as just a presentation, and including an orientation of our search room after hours. And students are often amazed to see what the documents look like in original format. And in one particular class, it's actually an exercise where they're given government files from the 19th, 20th century in sometimes terrible handwriting. And they're there to assess how it's valuable as a historical source. I have also experimented in introducing copies of documents even to school classes, to primary school classes, and have been amazed by their ability to read older handwriting. I'm talking sort of 19th century, But I think some of these records would probably challenge some of my colleagues, but I think the younger mind, they just go for it and enjoy. But I think we need to sort of look to more collaborations, don't we? I think for perhaps even just offering more, just focused on paleography and research skills, or maybe a second step after the introduction to the archives.
Yeah, I think what we tend to find, a lot of archives will find that they are approached by universities, and by a particular academic has a particular project in mind, and they will get in touch because they need your support for a big funding application. So it's not very often that the archives actually get to shape the academic projects that they would like to see with their collection. So I think definitely more engagement and conversation between the universities and the collections would actually be really helpful. We're not actually an independent research organisation as TNA and the British Library and others are, so we can't actually apply for academic funding ourselves. We have to do that with a partner. So it would be really, really great if we had a bit more involvement. So I think it's all about building networks with Scottish academics. They're in and out of our reading rooms a lot, so we have lots of different ways that we can build relationships with them. So yeah, that's a really important part of what we do, and there's definitely more that we can do in the future.
Yeah, I've definitely witnessed the kind of materiality question. Now that so much is kind of digital, people really respond on a very emotional level to kind of physical items, don't they? And we're definitely kind of encouraging the librarians and archivists of the future, I guess. And there's a really interesting comment in the chat that's kind of along those lines, like inspiring people into the profession. We have a couple of questions now in the Q&A. So the first one is, could you say a bit about where Scottish and English paleographical skills differ? What other kind of pitfalls for people who might be more used to dealing with kind of early English paleography?
I think
that's a massive question.
I think that, well, I'm English, and when I first started using, I did a master's at Glasgow University, and it was a taught master's, and one of the courses in paleography, and I introduced Scottish documents as well as English. And I really struggled with Scots words and also names and place names. When I started at the National Archives, as it was in the early 2000s, it was a very steep learning curve getting to grips with a whole new legal system, Scots words, geography, and so on. I think that for me, that's a challenge, and I've noticed it with other students. But I would say it made me a better paleographer, in that there's sometimes I would guess words in English, and then when you don't know what the word is, it forces you to try and read each letter. And I found the Dictionary of Scots Language, which is online, absolutely invaluable, because it gives you examples of Scots word, but in context, so helpful.
Definitely, I think definitely from teaching adult beginners, they actually find weird spelling more difficult than the paleography. We will often say, read it out. If you read it out in a weird accent, you'll get it. It's just that the spelling is odd. They are so accustomed to standardised spelling now. That is a real pitfall. I mean, I was very lucky. I came up here to university and I did Middle Scots, never thinking I was going to be an archivist and Middle English, and that was incredibly helpful. The paleography is not that different. It's the packaging. So it's that weights and measures are different. There's some different dating methods, which I found very confusing. As you say, the entire legal system is different. So deeds are different here. That was difficult because I didn't understand the diplomatic. So it wasn't actually the paleography, it was all the trimmings that we tripped up on. So that's why the Scottish handwriting website is so great, because it talks about all of these Scottish technical points that really make that difference. If you're fairly well-grounded in English paleography, you can make that move once you've had those extra bits explained, all those pitfalls and strange spellings that you will then think, that explains it. And it's practice. So I'm now out of practice. That we're doing something called Collections Week this week at NRS. So a lot of the staff in my part, we down tools and we all work with a collection for a week on a particular project. So I'm actually looking at letters from the 1630s, and I haven't done that for a couple of years. And I'm thinking, this is actually quite hard work, because my eye's out and it's coming back. Hopefully by Friday I'll be steaming ahead. But yeah, you do lose it when you're not doing it every day.
Yeah. I think we've just got time for one last question, which is also in the Q&A. Thank you for the interesting presentation. I feel like this is going to give us all an existential crisis. Do you see handwritten text recognition software such as Transcribus as a potential threat to paleography in the future?
I haven't used it myself. I keep hearing better and better things about it. I think that's really what the role of the archivist is. It's all about that contextualization and interpretation. It's all very well being able to read the document, but if you don't understand what the form of the document is, or the language, or all of the background to how that record was created, you're going to miss half of it. So I think we still have a role. I don't think we're going to be unemployed just yet. It can be hugely valuable. I think at the moment, from what I've heard about it, it still has some way to go. It gets better over time the more of a particular script that you feed into it. There were so many scripts, and you have scripts that are mixed as well. So
like the Kirk session records, you've got the hands of many people. I think some genealogists curse it because they're interested in the awful hand.
Yeah, so I think there's quite a long way to go. I think at the moment the editing and corrections that you would have to do may possibly outweigh benefits, but in the future it's going to be great for just transcribing huge swathes of document that, you know, it takes so long to do a transcription. Even if you just get a slightly garbled overview, at least you'll see whether it's worth looking into further or not. So yeah, I'll be really interested to hear a bit more about it, I must say.
Me too.
Great. Thank you so much to Tessa and Charlotte. That was a great final paper of the day. And so we now are going to have a 10-minute break before the paleography room starts. So we'll be returning at 12 minutes past 4. You will need to, before I say this, can I just encourage everyone who's here who are members of the CILIP RBSCG, just a plug to please come to the AGM, which is at 2 p.m. tomorrow, the beginning of the final day of papers. We would really appreciate having as many of you there as possible. So just admin for this afternoon. So we're going to be leaving this webinar in a minute and joining the Zoom meeting, the link of which has just been posted into the chat, but it's also in the delegate pack if you need it there. And just a reminder, that will be at 12 minutes past 4, and then I will welcome you to the final session, the paleography escape room. So see you all on the other side.